When Michael received the old box, he almost left it sitting in the corner of his apartment unopened, convinced it was just another pile of junk left behind after the death of his Aunt Ruth, the woman the whole town had always whispered about, as if she were a living curse. But curiosity, that dangerous itch he had never quite learned to suppress, finally got the better of him. He pulled the lid off, sneezing as a cloud of dust rose, and peered inside. A stack of letters tied with a faded ribbon rested on top, their envelopes yellowing and brittle, the ink bleeding from age. Beneath them lay a notebook, its blue cover frayed, the pages warped by water damage. He lifted it carefully, feeling an unexpected weight in his hands, a weight that seemed more than paper. The journal smelled faintly of mildew and tobacco smoke, as if it had absorbed decades of secrets. When he opened the first page, the handwriting leapt out at him, jagged and urgent, the strokes heavy as if carved into the paper with anger or desperation. "They will never forgive me if I speak," one entry began. "But silence is the poison that has already killed too many." Michael read on, his heart quickening. The words were cryptic, scattered, but they suggested things he had never imagined about his aunt or the town he had once called home. Names appeared, people he knew or thought he knew, alongside fragments of incidents that carried the stench of scandal. A pastor who forced a girl to disappear, a mayor who bought loyalty with hush money, families who agreed to keep quiet as long as their secrets were protected in return. His throat tightened as he turned the pages faster, each line more disturbing than the last. Aunt Ruth had written of betrayals, humiliations, and nights where silence was not just an option but a demand enforced by something darker than fear. Michael sat back, the journal open on his lap, his mind spinning. Could this be real? Or was it the product of a lonely woman's imagination, the delusions of someone whom the town had branded eccentric and unstable? Yet the names were too precise, the details too sharp. He remembered those people, those events, even if he had never known what lay beneath the surface. A chill ran down his spine as he came across his own family name. His father's, scrawled among the guilty, tied to words like deal, betrayal, and blood. Michael's breath caught. He flipped back, reading the line again and again. His father, who had died years ago, always a respectable man in his memory, a man who spoke proudly of principles and hard work. What had he done? What had his aunt been trying to expose? And why had no one listened to her? He set the journal aside and pulled out the letters, opening one at random. The letter, written decades earlier, seemed to beg for forgiveness, pleading with Ruth not to reveal something to outsiders. Another letter accused her of being a liar and warned her to keep her mouth shut if she wanted to live in peace. Michael's hands trembled. This was no fiction. This was a web, and his aunt had been caught in it until her dying breath. He tried to shake off the unease, but it clung to him like damp air. He thought of the small town where Ruth had lived her entire life, the place he had escaped from as soon as he was old enough. Its streets, its houses, its people, it all seemed innocent on the surface, but the journal suggested rot buried just beneath. He imagined his neighbors smiling while carrying knowledge of sins that should have destroyed reputations and lives. He imagined them watching Ruth, treating her as the town lunatic, while secretly terrified of what she might one day say aloud. He closed the box quickly, his pulse pounding. Part of him wanted to shove it in a closet and never look again, but the entries burned in his mind, the questions clawing at him. Why had Ruth kept writing, if no one ever believed her? Why leave it behind for him? He stared at the notebook again, the ink heavy and almost violent in its insistence, the words ringing in his ears. Silence is the poison. He whispered the phrase, tasting its bitterness. What had she meant? That the town had survived on silence, that everyone knew but no one spoke? And now, by opening the journal, he had become part of it. His phone buzzed on the table beside him, jolting him from his trance. A message from his cousin, short and cold. "I hope you're not digging into Ruth's nonsense. She was always crazy. Don't embarrass the family." Michael froze, the hairs on his neck standing up. How had his cousin known? He hadn't told anyone about the box, hadn't mentioned it to a soul, unless someone else already knew it existed. He looked around his small apartment, suddenly aware of the silence pressing in from all sides, a silence that felt expectant, watchful. Slowly, he placed the journal back in the box, but the words he had read refused to be contained. They were in his head now, gnawing, whispering. He knew, in the way you know when a storm is coming, that once he had opened those pages, there would be no going back. And as he locked the door and drew the curtains tight, Michael swore he heard footsteps in the hallway pause right outside, lingering, before moving on. Michael thought the hardest part was opening the box, but as the days went on, he realized the real weight lay in carrying its contents with him. The diary sat on his nightstand, the cracked leather cover staring at him like an unblinking eye. He couldn't ignore it, though part of him wished he had left it unopened in the attic. The first entries had been unsettling, stories of whispered conversations in kitchens and shadowed corners of the small town where he had grown up. But as he read deeper, his late Aunt Margaret's tone sharpened, her words dripping with venom about neighbors, relatives, and old friends who had wronged her. Michael had known her only as the eccentric woman who lived alone at the edge of town, never attending family gatherings, sending Christmas cards signed only with an M. Now her voice, preserved in ink, was louder than ever. The journal spoke of humiliation, a church fundraiser where she had been deliberately shunned, a family dinner where her contribution had been mocked, a business deal where she was cheated by a cousin. Margaret had written it all down, every slight, every insult, every betrayal, and she did not forgive. What unsettled Michael most were the passages that blurred memory with intention, where her scrawled handwriting swelled into rage. They laugh at me now, but silence keeps them safe. One day silence will no longer be enough. He couldn't shake the phrase. Silence keeps them safe. Safe from what? The next morning, Michael made the mistake of asking his mother about Margaret. They were sitting at the kitchen table, the smell of toast between them. She was troubled, his mother said carefully, buttering bread with slow precision. Always thought the world was against her. Best you don't dig too much into that box, Mikey. Let the past rest. The warning was gentle, but her eyes carried something sharper. He dropped the subject, but the unease grew. That evening, he went into town, stopping at the old diner where Margaret used to eat. He ordered coffee and asked the waitress, an older woman who had been working there since Michael was a boy, if she remembered his aunt. The waitress froze, the pot of coffee hovering midair, then poured without looking at him. I remember, she said curtly. Best not to bring her up. Some stories don't do anyone good. When he pressed, she snapped. Leave it, Michael. Don't go making old ghosts walk again. The room grew colder, and he realized the other patrons had gone silent. Heads turned subtly in his direction, eyes watching, warning. He left soon after, the coffee barely touched. That night, he couldn't sleep. He reread the journal, the words clawing at him. Margaret described how the town's most respected families had bound themselves with unspoken agreements, covering for each other's cruelty, ignoring theft, silencing abuse. They hold hands in church, she wrote, but their hands are stained. They hide behind prayer, behind smiles, but the rot runs deep. And I, the mad woman, the bitter aunt, am the only one who keeps the record. My silence is my gift. But gifts can be taken back. Michael felt a pulse of dread. It wasn't just bitterness. There were hints, details he didn't want to believe. A girl disappearing after a summer festival. A man found dead, ruled an accident, though Margaret wrote. They laughed that night, their secret sealed. I watched them. Michael felt sick. He couldn't tell if his aunt had uncovered a real conspiracy or if she had drowned in her own paranoia. But when he tried to dismiss it, the memory of the diner's silence came back. People knew. They just didn't want it spoken aloud. The following day, Michael walked down Main Street with the journal in his bag. He wanted answers. At the hardware store, Mr. Tully, a stout man with gray whiskers who had known Michael since childhood, greeted him stiffly. Michael mentioned Margaret, trying to sound casual, but the old man's face hardened. That woman stirred trouble until her last breath. Don't go digging, boy. You'll end up hated same as her. His voice dropped, gravelly. Some things in this town are buried for a reason. He turned away, refusing to say more. Everywhere Michael went that day, he felt the shift. Neighbors who once waved now avoided his eyes. The air itself seemed thicker, charged with unspoken hostility. That evening, as he walked home, he noticed a slip of paper tucked beneath his windshield wiper. In thick, uneven letters, it read, "Put it back in the box. Stay quiet. This is your only warning." His hands trembled as he held it. The paper smelled faintly of cigarette smoke, the edges smudged. Fear crawled up his spine. He rushed home and locked the doors, heart pounding as he paced the living room. Who had written the note? A neighbor? Someone at the diner? His mother? He tried to convince himself it was a prank, but deep down he knew it wasn't. He returned to the journal, searching for answers, desperate. The words blurred in his shaking hands until one phrase burned into him. They think silence is loyalty. But silence is only another word for fear. Suddenly there was a noise outside, gravel crunching under tires, then headlights flooding his living room through the thin curtains. Michael froze, ducking away from the window. The car idled for a long minute, engine humming like a growl in the night. Then the lights blinked once, twice, before the engine cut off and silence swallowed the house. Michael sat in the dark, clutching the journal to his chest, realizing with horror that his aunt's words were not just memories. They were warnings, and now, he was no longer safe. Michael didn't sleep that night, though he tried, curling up on the couch with the journal beside him like a shield. Every creak of the old house, every gust of wind against the siding made him tense. When dawn finally broke, pale light seeping through the blinds, he sat up with the heavy knowledge that something had changed. He wasn't just reading Margaret's words anymore. He was living them. The town had noticed, and the town didn't forgive curiosity. He thought about leaving, packing the box, and driving far from here, but something wouldn't let him go. Maybe it was stubbornness, maybe guilt, or maybe the way Margaret's handwriting seemed to rise from the pages like a dare. By mid-morning, he decided he had to talk to someone. Anyone who might give him answers without the rehearsed denials, the silence. He considered his mother, but she had already brushed him off. He needed someone on the margins, someone who didn't have anything to lose. That's when he thought of Clara. Clara had been a year above him in school, the quiet girl with thrift shop dresses and notebooks full of sketches. After graduation, she had stayed in town, tending bar at the rundown tavern on the edge of the highway. Michael hadn't spoken to her in years, but he remembered the way she'd once stood up in class, trembling but defiant, when the teacher accused her of lying about another student cheating. She had told the truth even when no one wanted to hear it. If anyone in this town still valued honesty, maybe it was her. That afternoon, he drove to the tavern. The neon sign buzzed faintly in the daylight, and the smell of stale beer clung to the doorway. Clara was behind the counter, her hair pulled into a messy bun, dark circles under her eyes. She looked up, surprised, when Michael walked in. "Haven't seen you in years," she said, wiping down the bar. "What brings you here?" He hesitated, then pulled the journal from his bag, laying it on the counter. "It's about my Aunt Margaret." Her eyes flickered, recognition flashing too quickly. She closed the rag in her hands, leaned in. "Where did you get that?" "She left it for me. Or maybe she left it for anyone who would listen. I need to know if it's true." The things she wrote, about this town, about people. Clara's jaw tightened. For a long moment, she didn't speak, just stared at the cover of the journal like it might bite. Finally, she whispered, "People said she was crazy. But she wasn't. Not all the time. She knew things she shouldn't have. Things nobody wanted spoken." Michael leaned closer. "So it's true? The cover-ups, the disappearances, the lies?" Clara glanced around the empty tavern, lowered her voice. "When I was 12, my cousin disappeared. They said she ran away, but Margaret told my mother it wasn't like that. She said the men in this town made sure she was never found. My mom told her to shut her mouth, or we'd end up cursed the same. A week later, Margaret stopped coming around." She swallowed hard. She wasn't lying. I think she knew too much. Michael's pulse quickened. Finally, someone wasn't dismissing him. "Clara, I need your help. Everyone's warning me off, but I can't ignore this. Last night, someone left me a note. They're watching me." Clara's eyes widened, but instead of fear, something like resolve flashed there. "Then you're closer to the truth than you think. You're not the only one who's felt it. This town's rot. It's been eating at us for years. People pretend, but we all know." Margaret wrote it down. That's why they hated her. She wouldn't play along. For the first time since opening the box, Michael felt less alone. He handed Clara a page he had marked, the entry about the summer festival and the girl who vanished. Clara read silently, her lips tightening. "That was my cousin," she said quietly. "I knew it." Her hands shook, but she didn't close the book. "They'll come after you for this. They'll come after both of us now. You understand that, right?" Michael nodded, the weight of it sinking in. But alongside the fear was a strange, stubborn relief. confirmation that Margaret hadn't been lost in madness, that her pain had roots. They spent hours going through the entries together, cross-referencing dates, matching names to old rumors. Clara knew more than she had ever admitted to anyone, and with Margaret's words, the puzzle sharpened. Patterns emerged, accidents that weren't accidents, families that rose in wealth and influence while others were broken down. Margaret had been keeping a record of corruption so deep it was woven into the town's bones. By evening, Clara closed the journal and whispered, "This isn't just gossip. This is evidence. If we put it together, people would finally have to see." Michael wanted to believe her, but doubt gnawed at him. "And then what? Do you think anyone will listen? They'll bury us before they let this out." Clara looked at him with an intensity he remembered from school, that same defiant fire. "Then we don't ask permission. We make them listen." Before he could respond, the tavern door creaked open. Two men walked in, shoulders broad, their presence heavy. Michael recognized them immediately. Mr. Tully's sons, men who had grown up in the same town, but always carried themselves like enforcers of some unspoken order. They didn't look at the bar menu, didn't look at the TV above the counter. Their eyes went straight to the journal sitting between Michael and Clara. One of them smirked. "Well, look what crawled out of Margaret's grave." Michael's blood ran cold as Clara instinctively pulled the journal toward her. The taller brother leaned on the counter, voice low but sharp. "You're playing with fire, kid. And you're dragging others down with you. You want to end up like her." His words carried a threat more real than the headlights outside Michael's house the night before. Clara didn't flinch, though her knuckles whitened around the journal. "Maybe it's time the town stops pretending," she said, steady but quiet. The smirk vanished from the man's face. He leaned even closer, and for a moment Michael thought he might strike her. Then he pulled back slowly, tapping the counter with one thick finger. "You've been warned once. This is the last." The men left, their boots thudding against the floor, the tavern door slamming shut behind them. The silence that followed was heavier than any Michael had ever felt. Clara turned to him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Now you know." Margaret wasn't crazy. She was hunted. The tavern felt colder after the Tully brothers left, as if the air itself carried their threat. Michael sat frozen, staring at the door, waiting for it to creak open again, waiting for fists, for violence, but it didn't. Clara slid the journal into her bag with trembling hands and poured herself a shot of whiskey, downing it in one gulp. "They won't stop," she muttered. "They never do." Michael's mind spun. He thought about his aunt's warning in the journal, about enemies who wore familiar faces, about silence enforced not by laws but by fear. Clara looked at him, her eyes fierce. "You have a choice now. Walk away, burn the journal, live your quiet life. Or keep going and accept what comes with it." The weight of her words pressed down on him, and for the first time, he felt the enormity of what he had stumbled into. This wasn't just a family mystery anymore. This was war against the town's memory, a war his aunt had fought alone and lost. That night he returned to the house with Clara's voice echoing in his mind. The shadows felt closer, the silence sharper. He bolted the doors, closed the blinds, and tried to rest, but sleep was impossible. At midnight, a crash shattered the night. He rushed to the back porch to find the windows smashed, shards glinting across the floor. A brick lay on the rug with a note tied around it. His hands shook as he unwrapped it. In scrawled letters, "Leave or bleed." His chest tightened. Fear surged, but beneath it, anger ignited, hot and steady. They wanted him gone because he was close. He grabbed his phone and dialed Clara. "They came again," he whispered. She cursed under her breath. "I'll be there." Within 20 minutes, headlights cut across the yard, and Clara's beat-up sedan pulled up. She marched inside, looked at the broken glass, then at the note. Her face hardened. They're accelerating. Margaret must have been closer than anyone realized. That's why they silenced her. Michael's resolve deepened. "Then we don't stop. We dig deeper. Tonight." They spread the journal across the table, piecing together Margaret's last entries, each one a thread leading toward the same names: the Tullis, the mayor's office, the sheriff's family. Clara brought out old newspaper clippings she'd saved, reports of accidents, of missing people, of businesses mysteriously shuttered after disputes. The puzzle grew monstrous, a picture of a town built on secrets and blood. By dawn, exhaustion pressed down on them, but so did clarity. Margaret hadn't been paranoid. She had been documenting a network of silence enforced by fear and violence. And now Michael had inherited her role. As the sun rose, Clara leaned back, rubbing her temples. We can't keep this between us. We need someone outside the town, someone they can't control. Michael thought about it. A journalist, maybe. Someone who would listen, who wasn't tied to these people. But who? His phone buzzed then, startling him. A message from an unknown number. Stop digging. His throat tightened. The timing was too sharp to be coincidence. Clara grabbed the phone, read it, and swore. They're watching everything. Calls, messages. We can't trust anything electronic. She pulled a notebook from her bag and wrote. We need to move the journal. Hide it. Make copies. Michael nodded, his pulse racing. They packed the journal into a plain box, taped it shut, and decided to stash it in Clara's apartment above the tavern. On the drive, Michael felt eyes everywhere. The black SUV idling at a corner, the curtain twitch in a window, the truck that seemed to follow too long before turning away. By the time they reached her place, paranoia had clawed its way into his bones. Clara locked the door behind them, slid the box under a loose floorboard, and sat down heavily. It'll buy us some time, she said. But time was already running out. That evening, as Michael walked home alone, a car pulled alongside him. The window rolled down, and inside sat Sheriff Danner, his expression unreadable. Need a ride, son? His voice was calm, but Michael heard the weight under it. He shook his head. I'm fine. The sheriff smiled thinly. Your aunt was a troubled woman. Everyone knows that. Don't let her words drag you into something you'll regret. The car rolled away, leaving Michael in the dust, his heart pounding. The message was clear. They knew, they always knew. At home, he collapsed onto the couch, shaking. Margaret's voice seemed to whisper from the pages. They won't forgive, they won't forget. But truth has its own hunger. He knew then there was no way back. He had chosen. The following days blurred into a cycle of tension and secrecy. He met with Clara in hushed corners, pieced together timelines, whispered plans. But cracks began to form. Neighbors glared when he walked by. Old friends turned cold, conversations dying when he entered the room. Even his mother stopped answering his calls. One night, Clara didn't show up at their meeting spot. Michael waited for hours, panic gnawing at him. Finally, he drove to the tavern. The place was dark, the door locked. He pounded on it, calling her name, but no answer. Around the side, he found her car, door ajar, keys still in the ignition. His stomach dropped. Inside, the apartment was ransacked, floorboards pried up. The journal was gone. He staggered back, heart in his throat, the silence screaming louder than any threat. They had her. They had the journal. His last fragile ally had vanished, and now the weight of Margaret's legacy pressed down on him alone. Michael's breath came in sharp, shallow bursts as he stared at the overturned chair in Clara's apartment, the broken lamp, the floorboards ripped up where the journal had been hidden. His fists clenched until his nails dug into his palms, and for a moment he couldn't tell if the shaking in his body was from rage or fear. The silence pressed on him, heavy and mocking, the weight of everything his aunt had written now balanced precariously on his shoulders. He forced himself to move, to think, to act. Clara was gone. The journal was gone, and the message was clear. If he wanted to survive, he needed to walk away. But survival without truth felt like betrayal. His phone buzzed, the same unknown number flashing again. A new message, tomorrow. Old Mill. Come alone. One last chance. His heart pounded. They wanted to end it, one way or another. He sat on the edge of the wrecked couch, head in his hands, until the night bled into dawn. By morning, his decision was made. If he didn't go, Clara was dead already. If he did, maybe she still had a chance. He packed nothing but the copies they had made of the most damning pages, sliding them into a manila envelope and tucking it under his jacket. If they killed him, he wanted someone to find them, to know. He wrote a note, left it on his kitchen table, addressed to no one and everyone. The truth is in the silence. Don't let them bury me too. The drive to the old mill felt endless. Every turn of the cracked two-lane road carried the possibility of headlights appearing behind him, of black SUVs closing in. The mill loomed out of the fog, a hulking carcass of rusted iron and splintered wood, its windows like hollow eyes. He pulled in, killed the engine, and sat for a moment, gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles whitened. Then he stepped out, the gravel crunching underfoot, the chill of the morning air biting into his skin. Voices echoed from inside. He followed them, his pulse hammering in his ears. The wide hall smelled of mildew and dust, broken machinery scattered like corpses. In the center of the space, lit by a single swinging bulb, stood Clara, tied to a chair, her lips split, one eye swelling shut. Beside her, Sheriff Danner and the Tully brothers waited, their expressions grim and resolute, as though they were not men but the embodiment of the town itself, guardians of its poisoned silence. "You shouldn't have come," Danner said quietly, almost sorrowfully. "Your aunt made the same mistake. She thought the truth was something pure, something that could heal. She didn't understand. It's a disease. It spreads, it destroys. We contain it." Michael's throat tightened. "You killed her," he spat. "You killed anyone who got in your way." Danner didn't flinch. "We kept the town alive. You think you're uncovering evil, but you're standing on the bones of sacrifices that gave you a home, a life. Sometimes silence is mercy." Clara's muffled voice broke through, hoarse but defiant. "Don't listen to him, Michael. It's lies. All of it. Don't let them." One of the Tully brothers struck her across the face, silencing her cry. Rage roared in Michael's chest, burning away his fear. He reached into his jacket, pulled out the envelope, and held it up. "Copies," he said, his voice shaking but loud. "All of it. Names, dates, proof. If I don't walk out of here, this goes public. You can kill me, but you won't stop the truth now." The brothers shifted uneasily, their eyes darting to Danner. The sheriff studied Michael, his jaw tight. For a long moment, the silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. Then Danner smiled faintly, but there was no warmth in it. "You're your aunt's blood, after all." Stubborn to the last breath. He nodded, and one of the brothers stepped forward, knife glinting in his hand. Michael's heartbeat thundered. This was the moment. Fight or fall. He lunged forward, ramming his shoulder into the man's chest, knocking the knife from his grip. Chaos exploded. Clara toppled sideways with her chair, shouting through her gag. Michael scrambled, his hands closing around the knife, slashing wildly to keep the others at bay. A blow struck his ribs, another his jaw, the room spinning with pain and noise. But through it all, he clung to the envelope, to the thin hope that the truth could outlive him. He slashed the ropes binding Clara, shouting, "Run!" She staggered to her feet, pulling the gag free, her face a mask of blood and fury. "Not without you," she screamed. Together they stumbled toward the door, the Tully brothers snarling behind them, Sheriff Danner's gun drawn, his voice calm but deadly. "One more step and you're both done." Michael froze, Clara's hand gripping his. The barrel of the gun gleamed, steady and unwavering. Danner's eyes met his, full of certainty, of the power of a man who had always been obeyed. Michael's chest heaved, the envelope slick in his sweating grip. He realized then that this was the fulcrum, the point where everything balanced. Silence or truth, death or defiance. He tightened his hand around Clara's, looked back at the sheriff, and said, "Then pull the trigger." But the silence dies with us. And with emotion so fast it startled even him, he hurled the envelope into the air. Pages fanned out like white birds, scattering across the room, the damning words of Margaret's journal flying free. For the first time, Danner's mask cracked. Panic flickered across his face. The Tully brothers lunged, but the papers were everywhere now, slipping into corners, floating toward the open doorway. Clara screamed, Michael roared, and in that storm of flying words, nothing would ever be contained again. The pages drifted like ash in the stale air of the mill, words falling at the feet of men who had spent their lives making sure those same words were never spoken. Michael's chest burned with every breath, Clara's grip trembling in his, the blood from his split lip mixing with the salt of sweat. Sheriff Danner stood frozen, his gun still raised but his face undone, the cracks in his authority spreading like fractures in glass. One of the Tully brothers lunged for the nearest sheet, but Michael kicked him away, shouting hoarsely, "It's over. You can't stop it now." And for the first time, Michael believed it. The silence, that suffocating pact that had haunted this town for generations, was breaking in front of them, one torn page at a time. But the moment stretched too thin, the violence too close. Danner's composure snapped. The shot tore through the air, deafening, and Michael felt the hot sting as it grazed his shoulder, spinning him backward. Clara screamed, dragging him toward the doorway as chaos erupted. Another shot fired, shattering the swinging bulb overhead, plunging the mill into a storm of shadow and panic. They ran, stumbling into the cold dawn light, the papers still fluttering behind them like a trail of fire. The sound of pursuit echoed, boots slamming against wood, voices cursing and snarling. Michael's lungs burned, his vision blurred, but Clara's arm around him held him upright, each step forward a defiance of everything that had tried to crush them. They burst through the weeds and into the gravel lot where his car sat waiting, keys trembling in his bloodied hand as he wrenched the door open. Clara shoved him inside, slid into the driver's seat, and the engine roared to life. Gravel sprayed as they tore away from the mill, the rearview mirror filled with shadows that grew smaller, then vanished into the fog. Silence returned, but it was no longer the silence of fear. It was the silence of something broken, something finished. Hours blurred into one another as Clara drove, Michael pressing torn fabric against his wound, his thoughts caught between triumph and despair. They hadn't destroyed the men who hunted them, but they had shattered their grip on control. The words were out now, scattered across that mill like seeds on the wind. Someone would find them, read them, question the lies the town had swallowed for so long. But at what cost? Michael stared at Clara, her jaw set, her eyes fierce despite the swelling bruises. She had risked everything to stand with him, and now their lives were changed forever. There would be no going back, no pretending they were just ordinary people in an ordinary place. They had pulled the mask from the town's face, and the ugliness underneath would not forgive them. Days later, word spread. Quiet at first, whispers in diners and gas stations, then louder, bolder. Copies of the journal surfaced. Michael didn't know how. Only that some pages must have been carried out by the wind, by strangers who refused to stay silent. The sheriff gave a statement, flat and rehearsed, blaming delinquent mischief and unsubstantiated rumors. But the cracks were too wide now. Lawsuits were filed, old cases reopened, names whispered for the first time in decades. People who had stayed quiet all their lives began speaking, trembling but defiant, as though Margaret's words had given them permission to breathe. Michael sat on his porch one evening, bandages tight against his ribs, staring at the horizon as the sun bled into the trees. Clara sat beside him, a cup of untouched coffee in her hands. Neither of them spoke for a long time, the weight of everything pressing down. Finally, she whispered, "We set something loose, Michael. We can't control where it goes." He nodded, his throat tight. Maybe we're not supposed to. He thought of his aunt, of the lonely years she had spent writing her truth into blue ink, knowing it might never be read. He wondered if she would be proud, or if she would pity him for the blood spilled in her name. Clara reached for his hand, her touch steady despite the tremor in her voice. "Do you regret it?" He stared at their joined hands, then at the fading sky. The truth burned inside him, heavy and raw. "Every day," he said. Then, softer, "and not at all." Because regret and pride lived side by side now, inseparable, the twin scars of choosing truth over silence. Weeks passed, the town unraveling thread by thread. Some neighbors avoided him, others glared with open hatred, but a few, just a few, met his eyes with gratitude, as though relieved someone had finally named what they had always known. But danger still lingered. One night his tires were slashed, another time a rock smashed through his window, the word traitor painted in dripping black across his door. Silence was not dead. It was wounded, furious, lashing out like a cornered animal. He knew it would haunt him for the rest of his life, that there would never be peace as long as those who thrived in shadows still breathed. And yet, he also knew the silence would never rule again. He had broken it, cracked it wide open, and the sound of its shattering would echo forever. On a rain-soaked evening months later, Michael walked to the edge of town, to the overgrown cemetery where his aunt was buried in an unmarked grave. He knelt in the mud, the journal pages long since gone, but her words carved into his memory. "It's done," he whispered. "You're not alone anymore." The rain fell harder, washing blood and dirt from the stone, and he closed his eyes, hearing in the downpour not silence, but release. Whether the world forgave him or not didn't matter. The truth had been spoken. The weight of silence was no longer his to bear alone.